Welcome to the Sex and Space YouTube channel. We're about to show you a full video version of one of our awesome podcast interviews. You can check out the regular audio pod on all platforms where amazing podcasts are found. Be sure to hit us up with a like and subscribe, check out the socials for more content, and visit sexandspace.com to buy our book and our merch. All links are in the video description below. Without further ado, let's get into the interview.
Hello, Joe Robertson, sex therapist.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming and talking to us on Sex and Space. You are a sex therapist, a betrayal trauma specialist. Is that right?
Yeah.
And also do parent consulting as well.
Yeah.
Super interesting and lots to cover off. I think from my perspective, and probably a lot of people who have never been to a sex therapist, maybe more people should and never been, but what do you do? What is a sex therapist? And it's like broadest possible terms, I guess.
Yeah, so basically, most people who practice as a sex therapist will be taught to work with couples or individuals at any stage of life around what they're struggling with in their intimacy or fears they have around intimacy. So sometimes people see sex therapists and they're not actually having sex yet or any type of intimacy. And we are trained to see it from what we call a biopsychosocial model. So what's going on in the body, what's going on in the brain, like what are their thoughts, beliefs, ideas about sex, and then what's going on in the relationship and or the world around them. So not just that person in their silo, but what were the messages they got from family? What's the media they consume? What religion did they grow up in? How does all of that shape what they're doing now and what they're going to do in the future? And then I guess unpacking that with them and seeing if that's what they want it to look like. And here are some strategies then to shift things up a bit.
That's really interesting. So like, I guess for me, I was wondering if there's, or do you find that there's a line in the sand that people have to get to, or an acknowledgement that they need your help in some way? Those sort of trigger points or lines in the sand that make people seek you out.
Yeah, I would say the two biggest factors that tend to put people over the edge in terms of reaching out is one, like a prolonged time of not having pleasure from intimacy.
Yeah.
And the second one is a prolonged period of dissatisfaction or unhappiness. So some people don't have a lot of pleasure, but they still have a lot of personal satisfaction from the intimacy. Other people get a lot of pleasure, but they still don't find it personally satisfying. So those two don't always have to go together. So usually there has to be a period of time where they themselves or their partner or them together are going, I'm not into it. And then they want to do something about that. Obviously, if you're in a committed relationship, you're more likely to want to do something about it because you're thinking, I'm going to spend a lot more time with this person and I'd like for it to be different.
Yeah. So people are coming to you as they've hit a wall potentially, or
well, they potentially hit one like 20 years ago. It's just that they have finally come to the place of going, all right, I don't want to be in the same place in another 20 years time.
Yeah. Interesting. And are there any, like, I guess more, I mean, I watched your TED talk. That was from 2019, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for like 12, 13 years now?
Yeah. So I've been, 12 years. Yeah.
So in that time, have you, because obviously it feels like everything's changing quite fast culturally and stuff like that. Have you noticed different themes or triggers that people are coming to you with, like in that time, like, I don't know, consumption of pornography or any of these kind of more modern things that are kind of influencing the reasons why people might come to you?
Yeah, I think, you've really brought up an important piece there. We know porn consumption has gone up significantly around the world,
Yeah.
and it continues to do so, and particularly with young people, but that's happening across all genders, etc. That consumption is increasing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, education hasn't quite risen at the same level, so it is getting better. And there's platforms like what your group are creating, which show that there's more and more conversations that are being sparked around sex education, really good, robust quality education. But it hasn't risen at the same rate as porn has. And so you've got a lot of people who've got a lot of ideas about what they think sex should be like, with no idea how actually that would work out in practice, or not even knowing still much about their own anatomy. But hey, this is the visual that I've got that my sex life is supposed to compare to. So potentially dissatisfaction has increased.
Yeah.
So a feeling of my sex life isn't quite living up to the standards of what I think it should be. But when I talk to people, sometimes, part of my job is just to really go, this is totally normal. Like what you're actually doing and feeling and what's like in practice happening in your relationship is super duper normal. Now, does that mean that you don't want to improve? No, like we can still do things to make everyone's sex lives a little bit better, but like we don't live in a movie.
Yes.
And we don't live on a porn set, and that wouldn't be great anyway. But people don't have a lot of tolerance, I think, for real life impacting their sex life. So there's this idea that it should just be great all the time.
Yeah.
And
I think it's very refreshing to hear, that some of these things that people are sort of dealing with are probably fairly common.
So common.
Yeah.
So common. And that's a really big piece, is just saying to people, you're not broken. Because people walk around, thinking I'm the only one, and that means that I'm defective. And it's the first time they may have shared and said, this is how my body feels during sex, or I don't like it, or I don't want it, or I hate this, or whatever it is. And does that mean something is wrong with me? And, I just wish I could almost count the amount of people who've said that in 1 week. I mean, I could do that one day, and then I could say, 7 other people this week have said that to me. Like, you are not the only person. You are not defective. You're not broken.
Yeah, I think it's refreshing. Like, as a parent as well myself, like, time poor. Focusing suddenly on these, other two very important little people. Things like that. I mean, you can sort of see how those plus all of the other stuff that sort of culture throws at you, changing sexual preferences through porn or body imagery, all that kind of stuff could all sort of add up to, and social media consumption, what used to be intimate time is now Instagram time, all that stuff. It feels like, I mean, you could paint quite a depressing picture, but it's great that you're out there and people are sort of, seeking help as well. As and when they need it. So some of the sort of tools, I guess, I mean, I don't want to, you'd have to give up the game, so to speak, or of what you do. Some of the tools that people could sort of expect to come away from, I mean, is it all, I mean, I feel like communication, generally better communication across all aspects of life, is a good thing, but the sort of tools that you'd equip people with, really, that will come to you, is give us an insight into what they may be.
I'd say a lot of the time what we're doing is helping people get comfortable in their own bodies.
Yep.
Helping people get comfortable talking about sex, and then also rebuilding desire. So typically people are coming to a sex therapist because there's something missing. There's something that they feel they're lacking. And the most common one would be a mismatched feeling, like desire. So my partner wants sex more than me, or I want sex more than them, or whatever it is. And so we're building desire for the person who feels like they don't have enough of it. Now, that um, sometimes that's what people come and to see me about. And they're like, I need to get more desire, I need a higher libido. And it's actually like, maybe your partner needs to chill out a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the partner that we need to talk about some realistic expectations. So
Yeah.
that's communication. But like I mentioned before, so that's talking about sex, getting comfortable with your body, getting comfortable with your partner and conversing about it, etc., getting some language. But then on the flip side of that, for the person who's got low libido, how are we going to build this? How are we going to create a sex life for you that you actually want? Because when somebody says to me, I don't have much desire for sex, I'm like, well, it's probably because the sex is pretty average. Like, your body doesn't want something that's not that good. And that's not anyone's fault. Often that's just through pure lack of education. Like, I don't really know what I like. I don't really know what they like. I don't know what to try next. I don't know how we would make this a little bit more interesting. We've been together for 20 years. What's the next steps?
Yeah.
So we're doing a lot of strategies to build that desire back up, do some education in the process around what the body needs, what relationships need to keep stuff interesting, keep you curious about each other.
Yeah.
So there's no formula, there's no like one size fits all. I would say the most typical tool that I would use would be to actually encourage couples to start from scratch. So to pull back on intercourse entirely.
Okay.
And start to rebuild sexual play.
Right.
So intercourse has this way of kind of getting in the way. It's kind of like, it becomes it's like what people think sex is.
Yeah.
So as long as we've achieved the intercourse bit, then we've been intimate. And that can be over in like 2.5 minutes. Like, it's not high levels of intimacy happening there often. And so when we take it away, people have to get a little bit more creative. They have to play a little bit. They have to be a bit more intentional. They tend to spend more time with each other, and it tends to be a lot better. So it doesn't mean intercourse is off the table forever, but for a time, it's a really effective strategy.
Yeah. This is great. I'm pleased I'm recording this. Send me the bill. No, that's really interesting. The other thing I think that I just picked up on with what you said before was it's it feels quite like obviously it's a good idea, but it feels like it doesn't. There's not a certain type of person that would come or need this necessarily. But it's interesting to hear you say that people don't understand themselves, like their own bodies and their own desires, and haven't done that work. Kind of, especially you might assume it's I have a low libido, for X reasons or whatever. Could be age related or whatever. But it's interesting that actually, to delve into that and to do this sort of starting from scratch, you might find that really you just set off on this one little path whenever you started your sexual journey, and that's the one you stuck on. And actually to go right back to back to the beginning could lead to some amazing places that you would never have considered.
Yeah, absolutely, because it removes the foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
And if we take away the conclusion that sex has always come to in your history, then what we get, is much more creativity.
Yeah, that's really interesting because an amazing almost opportunity, really, that a lot of people probably don't put on the table that, it doesn't have to be like, I don't know, I guess people form habits or whatever, but to get creative and explore. That's really interesting. And I guess the sort of like there's no is there like a right amount or of sex therapy? I guess you just keep going until you feel like you've got somewhere.
Yeah. So we'd usually do about, I'm going to say the norm would be about 5 to 6 sessions.
Yeah.
And that's because we want to get a really robust history, so to really assess what's going on, and then try a few things and debrief along the way how that's going for you.
Yeah.
And every time I meet with somebody, whether it's the third or the fourth time, I'll say, okay, so tell me about your last few intimate encounters and what were those like? And they'll explain them usually quite briefly, and I'll say, okay, let's unpack it a little bit more. Like, what were you feeling? What was happening inside your body? What were you thinking about? How did you talk to each other afterwards? Like, let's really pull the pieces apart to make sure that it's a really rich experience for you going forward.
Yeah.
So often, for example, people might go, I loved everything that happened during the intimacy, during the sex, and then afterwards I feel like there's this disconnect between us. Like, okay, let's go there. So it's just we give the sessions, we just want to kind of let every bit of your intimate life breathe, and let's shed some light on all of it so that we can make sure it's functioning really well.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because it's, again, just then listening to talk, it's stuff that you probably don't consider, to think about the stuff that you really don't consider very often, or ever. How are you right after you've finished being intimate? What
do you say to your partner straight after?
What do you do? What are your habits? Do you,
how do you initiate?
Do you check your heart rate on your watch? What awful mood ruining things do you do? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that, like a classic mood ruiner is that this was like a gender trend. I don't know, like it's more likely to happen with a guy than it is with a woman, but that's not to say that that's always the rule. But guys tend to try and initiate sex through quite they try to be very clear but sometimes too brutish, like too crass about it. So they tend to think it's quite sexual and arousing to come up behind their person and like grab their bum, or like do a boob grab, or say like, do you want to come in the shower and I'll do this to you. It's like quite aggressive, not in like they're trying to hurt that person, but aggressive sexuality, like, I'm going to tell you directly what I want to happen, or I'm going to touch you directly the way I want to do it. And women don't typically respond super well to that. So they tend to find it a little bit abrasive, and like they're being, sometimes a little bit like they're being used to satisfy their sexual desires, as opposed to it being about them as a person that their partner wants to be intimate with. So that's one of those, like, they're kind of really micro mini moments in relationships, but they really matter because they determine how the sexual encounter flows from there. And so sometimes it's like the sex can be so much better just from, let's make a few adjustments in how you initiate. And you'll find that she turns around and is much more likely to go, let's. But we don't often in relationships like really talk about that stuff, and it's scary. It's hard to go there. We might feel rejected at the end of that conversation, but when we do, things get a lot better.
Well, I mean, being rejected in a conversation, in a safe space therapy session is probably nicer than being rejected at the time, or something like that as well. Like, So yeah, no, I think that's interesting. And of course, if you're in a therapy session, then you know you should be there for the learnings that you're going to get out of it as well. That's
Yeah, it's still hard.
yeah, no, I'm sure it is to
Yeah.
hear the home truths
Yes.
written large. Yeah. So interesting. Now, I don't want to jump over the betrayal trauma side of what you do. I think that's super interesting. But it might be an entire podcast episode in itself. And as the host of this podcast and as a parent, I really, really want to jump into the parental consultancy work that you do,
Yeah.
which also, you know, I know, having watched your TED talk on talking to kids about porn, is part of that broader conversation. But on your website, you mentioned that it's from 3 years old to 18 years old, and so yeah, I think for me, I was like, oh, this sounds so interesting, because there's a desire as parents to, you know, to keep your kids safe. So I thought, interesting dynamic but between like sex therapy for oneself, you know, where you could, like you said, put it off for 20 years, or you know, do kind of be like, oh yeah, you know, maybe my porn habits you know, progressing in an awful direction, or whatever it might be. I'll deal with that one day. But as soon as you say, you know, let's look out for your kids' safety, and I say safety, general well-being, and rest of things, that is just like, yep. Where do I sign? Super interested. And I think a lot of parents would, you know, feel the same way. Probably because we're all confused as hell anyway with how to navigate most things, because kids don't come with a handbook, and you know, most of us are sexually not illiterate, but like pretty challenged in our own right as well. Talk about it, you know, have probably historically had awkward conversations with our own parents, or have like crashed into and made loads of mistakes through our own life. So I think everyone's like, yes, please, you know, this is really. Do you find that, by the way? Do you find that people are really keen on this parent?
Yes.
Like, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, massive ramble there. Tell me about your parent consulting work.
Yeah. Well, it started about I'm going to say like 5 years ago. So when I was doing my master's, I decided to do my biggest piece of research on the global consumption rates of porn amongst adolescents and how it was impacting them. And so dived into that. Didn't really think too much about what we were kind of going to do with that information. Apart from that, I just found it really interesting. But then it really broadened out into how is technology impacting them? How is the media they consume, not just porn, but also, you know, the TV shows, often all it's PJ Masks, you know, like all the little kid stuff. How is that shaping them as well? Mostly in good ways, by the way. But but I became interested as my kids grew up around all the other media that they were consuming and how that might be shaping them. And then I also I was drawing on. I'd worked with kids from ages 5 and up in kids' trauma. So they've been sexually abused or physically abused, usually by someone in the home. And I've been working with kids for many, many years as a counselor. And I was thinking, okay, so we've got this media stuff over here, and then we've got kids having real traumatic experiences over here. And, you know, what do parents do about this? Like, what do they do when they find out that their kid has watched this, but then tried that out with their neighbor? And who do you call? Because often kids aren't, you know, sexually harming anyone. They're trying stuff out. So you can't get access to a service for sexual harm. But as a result, you got no one to go to. And so you just got endless reading that you can do online. There is a lot. But I thought, let's just, I just want to be able to have these chats with parents, give them some support, give them some tips. It often doesn't take heaps and heaps of information to be able to help a kid through a tricky time. It's like, these 3 questions are going to be the most helpful for you, and ask them every week. So I started reviewing children's books around consent, reproduction, intercourse, puberty, and digital and technology. And then I developed resources for parents, particularly around porn. I started doing talks and working with parents themselves. So it just kind of grew. It was never like a very intentional thing, but it's a bit of my work that I really love. Like, it's one of my favorite bits of work.
Yeah, I think it sounds really interesting. So it's essentially it's for parents. It's not a session with the kids and the parents per se. It's
No.
like tools for and skills for parents to navigate those awkward conversations, I suppose, from as early as they start happening, even, because I mean,
yeah,
they happen pretty early.
Yeah. And so it's, there's obviously, as you would know, there's a big difference between how you answer a 4-year-old's question, how you answer an 8-year-old's question. What has happened, I think, historically, is that all questions get shut down and until they feel it's age appropriate to start the conversation. And that tends to happen, has historically happened once, if at all, but once, and at about, 13 years old or something. Puberty talk usually happens about 10, and that's it. That's the end of those parenting chats. But these questions start emerging from our kids really around 3, and especially if they've got siblings with different genitals, etc. The questions are evolving from that age. And so how can we do parenting that's not a chat, but many chats, so they don't actually even remember? I remember this one time mum talking to me about consent. It's like it just becomes a part of the fabric of their being, that they know what consent is, because they've had so many micro conversations about it, that it's just become part of their value system. So yeah, I think it's, how do we introduce it at all the ages, and then how do we also deal with stuff when it goes wrong?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, anecdotally, I went to a talk at my daughter's kindergarten way back, and they were just talking a little talk about, they had a specialist come in, and they were talking about just how, even though it's very tempting to not use the appropriate names for genitals,
to not use the appropriate name.
No, that it's tempting to not use them.
Oh, I see.
Make people feel a bit, squeamish, or want to be cute or whatever it is. But they were outlining some of the issues that can kind of cause sort of further down the line.
Yeah.
And just setting off on the right foot with just understanding your body and that sort of thing. And I thought it was quite interesting. When I unpacked how even at that early age, if someone's calling, like a little girl might be calling their vulva something else, like a Pikachu or something like that, it can lead to in this one, again, anecdotal incident that they shared, was that she said she had a sore Pikachu. She was telling her teachers that she had a sore Pikachu, and they thought she was talking about her cuddly toy.
Yeah.
As you would. And so 2 weeks went by, and then it transpired that she was being abused or something like that. So it was very much like unpacking that just from that early age. But I mean, it sounds also like a great opportunity for parents to learn as well with your children. Is that something that you kind of encourage? Because I've got a 7-year-old daughter, and we've seeked out the Googleable facts about various questions she had, and that's quite an interesting process to go on as well yourself. But the keeping those conversations happening all the time is obviously where does it get? This is just one that I find might be missing out from the kind of Googleable side of stuff if you're going on these journeys with your children. How and if do you sort of address pleasure in these conversations? Like, is that something that you have a sort of framework for?
Yeah, well, I think we just normalize pleasure from genitals from a very early age.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a big deal if you see your child rubbing their genitals for you to say, how does that feel? And if they say, I don't know, you say, is it feeling nice? And they go, yeah. You go, okay, that's totally fine. Like, there's no big chat to have there. They know it feels nice. You know it feels nice. You can normalize it for them. So you can say, like, for example, if your kids are big on wearing no clothes, and boys are really commonly do this, and they rub their own penises and give themselves erections, then they go flaccid, then they rub them again. You know, it's just like, this is a fun time. And it's not sexual, it's truly just like curiosity, exploration, and it gives them that nice tingly feeling. It's not leading to anything, it's just they're exploring. And so you can say something at any age, like, hey, I know that feels really nice. That's something that's totally fine to do when you're in the privacy of your room. Let's just put some clothes on while we're here. So it's not that bad, it's not that naughty. You're acknowledging it feels good. You're kind of redirecting the behavior somewhere else. You're not saying you're not allowed to do that in front of us, but let's just put our clothes on now. So it's you're being very, very calm, chill, relaxed about it all the time. And those conversations increase as you do more body anatomy stuff with them. So even this morning, for example, I've got a 9-year-old son, and that was he saw your book and about the clitoris. And so he picked it up and he said, you know, what's this book about? And this is the journey of being a child in my house, is that you're always finding things. And so he was like, what's this about? And I said, it's a book about the clitoris. And he said, what's that? And then I said, oh, it's a part of usually a woman's body that hasn't been talked about much in the past. People didn't really do a lot of research on it, and they didn't, you know, doctors don't talk about it very much, etc. And he was like, oh, what is it? And I said, oh, I'm 100% happy to talk about that with you just when you're a touch older. And so I don't feel the need to answer all the questions.
Yeah.
But I also am happy to give them enough information for them to feel like I'm comfortable with any question. So I said, this is a book that's made for kids that are a little bit older than you, so you can read every bit of it when you're a bit older, and I'll answer any questions you have about it then. So it's like, we don't have to completely avoid the subject, but we also don't have to dive in there before we think that they're ready. Yeah, it's, you know, it's a dance. It's always a dance.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is, like you said before, learning yourself prior and getting a sense of what you do and don't want to say. And that will be different for each child. The way that I would answer one of my kids' questions is totally different to the way that I would answer another one. And so it's getting enough skills in yourself, getting enough knowledge in yourself that you can make those informed decisions.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've heard a lot of people, when kids are asking questions, there's a tendency to, you know, do a deep dive and answer a lot more questions than perhaps they were for as well. So, you know, it's sometimes the case you answer their one question and they're like, cool, right.
Yeah.
I have to do
totally.
Else,
that's what I call brevity over breadth. So they ask you a question, you just answer that question.
Yeah.
and then see if they have any more. There comes an age where, or there are certain personalities where you have to be more intentional than that. So one of my kids, I've got 3 boys. One of them is not inquisitive. Like, he does not ask questions about really anything. He does not a big talker. And so he's got a lot going on in his mind, I know, but he doesn't bring that out into the community. And so I have to be more intentional with him, as opposed to one of my oldest boy, who's got a million questions since he was born about everything.
Yeah.
And so it's just such a different approach, and you have to tailor what you're doing to each child. if I went for brevity over breadth, if I went for short answers over long answers with my non-talking child, he would not know anything until he was sexually active because he's not going to explore questions with me. He's not going to ask stuff. So I have to take charge there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, I guess, yeah, formulas within this sort of frameworks, I guess, are so dependent on the child's personality and what they're, you know, what they're up for, and the ages as well. So let's get to the pornography thing. I say let's start there, but I mean, I guess you highlighted in your TED talk that actually it's, you know, it's maybe a technology access thing is like the first sort of, I guess, worrisome point that you might sort of come across in this sort of evolution, or as the child grows up. Is that right?
I think you know, people think about porn and they go, okay, my kid won't be able to access that for ages, or isn't on a web browser or whatever it is, so they won't be any risk there for a long time. But actually there's a lot of sexual content that sits on your Netflix app that if it doesn't have a PIN code to, they can access anytime they want.
Yeah.
So it's thinking a bit broader and going, okay, sexual content, where does sexual content exist in our house? And how do I make sure that I put some barriers there for their safety, and so that they can organically grow up without any kind of sexual scripts being imposed upon them too early. And then obviously as they get more curious and more interested, you want to think about porn specifically. But there's just so much that they can see on YouTube. Like, I'm not a huge fan of YouTube Kids. I'm not a huge fan of YouTube in general. And so there's lots on Netflix, there's lots on Neon, there's lots on TVNZ. Like, there's all these apps that our kids just can jump onto basically at any time once they learn how to work a remote. Yeah. And we don't need to think about that. So if we can put just some fences around that, just like we would if they were playing outside in the front yard, you know, like, hey, where do we need to create some barriers for them to keep them safe? It's just the same with technology. And think through that from quite an early age. And then as they grow older, the conversations get deeper and wider. The barriers might come down or go up.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because I mean, and I'm not really equating, you know, sexualized or problematic content or porn or any of the horrors that go with that, but I suppose children's awareness of, you know, even erotic content or you know, certain things or certain themes that are in those more mainstream places. I mean, I guess what you offer with the parent consulting is ways to you know, help them understand stuff. I mean, I suppose, you know, since the ancient Greeks were painting, you know, orgy scenes on their vases, kids have probably been looking at them kind of going, what on earth's going on there, you know? But I guess having the skill set, so, you know, if they do see something that they've got a question about or whatever, you can help them get through that.
So you want to start that at about 4. So you start, you don't have to call it any particular name. You don't really have to even use the word porn or sex for a long time. But you say, for example, if they're starting to play with other kids, maybe without your presence, usually that starts around 4, and they're getting a little bit more device use, then you can say, you know, if you ever come across photos, pictures, videos of people who don't have any clothes on, or if they're touching another person, then just tell me straight away. You're never going to be in trouble. You know, kids can know that there's content that's not made for them and that they need to talk about before they know the word porn or sex for a long time. So you start that conversation quite early.
It's interesting. I think, you know, our 4-year-old son was pointing out boobies on some of the Marvel Avengers
Oh yeah.
things, because they're all very, skinny and
Yes,
boobylicious
there's
and
a
all
lot
that stuff.
happening there.
There's a kind of lot happening, and then so he was pointing them out. He's like, "Oh, boobies, 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 boobies." I was like, "Okay, and that I suppose was just like, yeah, one example of maybe content that's not aimed at a 4-year-old, but at the same time he's keen on Thor, and various other things. So it's
Right.
it's very accessible. Like you said, it's on some kids and various other, or on Disney Plus or whatever. Yeah, that's interesting. But in terms of when it comes to teenagers, and I say teenagers, maybe not. When it comes to kids that have been exposed to porn, what are some of the guiding principles of those kind of conversations that you should be having? I mean, I think we're all probably aware of the kind of outcomes that can come from pornography. So, are not particularly realistic expectations of body image or what you're meant to get up to, pleasure, those sorts of things. But I mean, in terms of articulating that to, I mean, what a 11, 12, 13-year-old, what are some of the tips for that, really?
Yeah. So I'll get to that. I want to jump back to your Avengers thing for a second.
Yes, please.
So I think this is a really great example of how you weave in messaging in so many little micro moments that they don't even realize it's happening. So for example, in that situation, I'd probably jump in and I'd go, "Oh yes, they are boobies. Did you know that like people have lots of different shaped bodies? What we can see here is we can see a lot of very little bodies with some big boobies, and that's not actually most people's bodies." And I would use that as a little, what we call being media literate, or like being critical of media. So unpacking those little tiny moments with them, and so that they can, the next time they see that image or they see other images of lots of skinny women with big boobs and tight clothes, they've just got like just a couple of thoughts there.
Yeah.
And it helps, on so many levels to start that very, very early. Just those tiny moments make quite a big difference. So just using all those moments as you can as a parent.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to the porn stuff, so yeah, there's lots of different impacts on young people. Some young people are impacted more than others, usually based on how much content they've seen, when they started watching, how realistic they perceive what they see is. So if they think, oh yeah, that's like real life sex, people are having like a really good time there. Or if they think this looks like faking and like this looks like somebody's acting this out, they're less likely to adopt the message. So not all young people or children are passive sponges. Like they all have different levels of critical thinking and resilience to messaging.
Yeah.
But what you want to do is basically, if you know of a young person in your life who's come across porn and you're in a relationship with them that where you can talk about that with them, then I really encourage you to do so, because they basically have no one who talks about it with them. They have said in every piece of research that they want adults to talk about porn more, and adults consistently say, "Oh, but we do," and young people consistently say, "No, but you don't." So we're not really offering them the opportunities to unpack the stuff that they're watching. So you want to do what I talked about in my TED talk, which is what I call heart, head, and hands. So first, like, address how they felt about the content, not jump in there with what you think about what they saw, but what was going on for them when they saw whatever it was that they did. So my son recently came across some really explicit sexual content that was written and drawn in a cartoon kind of form, not in a video. And so I don't jump straight in with like, so here are some of the issues with what you saw. Yeah. Even though I would love to do that straight away, I asked, like, what did you think? What did you feel? What were you wondering? What were your questions? Their experience is way more important than our lecture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some young people feel grossed out, like it makes them feel sick. Others, they feel really curious. Others think it's funny. Others feel awkward. And for some young people who've experienced trauma, it's triggering.
Mm.
So you can see how it would be more important for us to unpack the feeling than to go straight into some big chat about it.
Yeah.
And then what you want to do is talk about what they've seen. So I would try and learn about the specific content that they've watched or have been watching. If they don't feel comfortable disclosing that to you, that's okay. But you can know that a lot of mainstream porn is really aggressive and really aggressive towards women. So you could have a pretty good guess that they've seen something that's really confronting and that probably doesn't align with some of your values around respect or equality or feminism or whatever. So you can make some assumptions there that they've seen something that's like, you know, pretty gritty.
Yeah.
And you want to unpack that. So you say something, you ask questions like, did you see anything where someone was hurting another person? Did you see anything where it looked like someone was in pain? How did you feel? What did you think? Do you think that's what real sex would be like? Obviously, if you haven't talked about sex yet, you're going to. And this is, you know, the time has come.
Yeah.
But then you're giving some messages. You know, it's really important that when you have sex with someone, it's really respectful, it's really kind, that there's consent, that no one feels hurt, everyone feels safe, that it's pleasurable. So you're weaving in some good pleasure messages there. And then you go to hands, which is like, what are we going to do from here? Make a wee plan about technology, porn, different types of sexual content they might come across, you know, remind them they can talk to you, you're a safe person, etc. So there's a bit of a formula there, but it's going to be based on what they saw and how they experienced it. That's what you want to take as your starting point.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I mean, in terms of the research you mentioned you did, I mean, did you delve into the outcomes of sort of porn exposure?
Yeah.
In young people,
Yeah.
what were sort of the main takeaways really? Was it?
Yeah, so we can't draw like causative links. We can't say, oh, you know, someone who watched porn, it meant because they watched it, it ended in this, like X equals Y. But there are, in lots and like so much research now, there are what we call associations. So with higher use, this seems to happen. And there's lots of different influences on a young person's life that could create that behavior, but we do know that porn is a significant one of those influences. So some examples of impacts are increased gender stereotypes, so that men should be powerful, in control, dominating, women should be passive, submissive. Sex is for men and not for women. And then we also see high associations with risky sexual behaviors, so less likely to use condoms in sex, more likely to do behaviors that might physically hurt someone, not think through the consequences, less likely to ask for consent, seek consent, think that it's okay for someone to be hurt. So kind of an acceptance of sexual aggression.
Yeah.
And then we've got some mental health outcomes like preoccupation, for example, is like where somebody's sitting in school and they're supposed to be like focusing on their English work, and instead they're thinking about the porn that they watched last night or that they're going to watch the night ahead. Issues with sleep, that might be because of nightmares, or might be because they're watching porn right before they go to sleep and it creates some insomnia. And then real world kind of impacts on their sex life, like not feeling pleasure as much, needing porn to get aroused or stay aroused, having more kind of discrepancy in terms of who's having a good time in the sexual relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Acting out what they've seen or themes.
Yeah.
Similar
totally. Yeah. So some young people are more likely to act out what they've seen than others. A couple of vulnerable groups are our rainbow young people and our neurodiverse young people. Those with long-term kind of chronic health issues, etc. They tend to be more likely to watch porn, adopt the sexual script, and try it out in real life. So essentially, give stuff a go based on what they've seen, which can end in a myriad of ways. But so it's like really, really important we talk about porn with those groups, even more so than all of our mainstream young people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I'm 42, and I remember when I was growing up, porn was in like, obviously it was not accessible at all. You know, none of my friend group, you know, if you found some in the bushes, you know, you were like, score.
Yeah, totally.
You know, it was all printed and what have you, probably handed down from the 70s. Yeah, it was so interesting. I don't really, and I could be wrong, but I don't remember it having the sort of cultural impact, or even an impact on what I thought sex was, or how it would go. One seemed just like, oh, that's that over there, and then, you know, me and my stupid teenage mates thought sex would be, you know, this, but there was no real correlation between, you know, what we'd seen in porn and what we thought sex was really. And I think that's probably from, you know, hearing all the sort of more current conversations about it, it feels like that's flipped. People look look at porn for help,
sex education,
and their sex education on, you know, how do I know, how does she know when he's finished? Well, it's, you know, normally when you get a face full of you know, like it seems
and that's and that's because of its ease of access. So if you want to know how to give someone a hand job, you can just look it up on a website, as opposed to figuring that out yourself or asking someone. So it's just so accessible that it's become the dictionary for sex. And one of the fastest growing trends on Pornhub last year in 2021 was how-to searches. So how to do this and how to do that and how to do XYZ. And there are more and more young people self-disclosing themselves as well, that they are watching porn to know how to do things. So I feel so much empathy for them in that. Like, I understand wanting to know answers to your questions. That's absolutely valid and okay to want to know how to do things and want to know how to have pleasure in sex and how to have a good time and how to please your partner or whatever it is. It's just a shame that the mainstream porn that they're accessing to get the answers has got so many flaws.
That's really interesting, because I guess as sort of stuff snowballs to the sort of stuff which they're maybe going to be searching, the how-tos are slightly more, probably more extreme than, you know, would have ever crossed our minds. It's not just how to give a hand job, but how do I do the reverse cowgirl, or
yes.
That's really interesting. Briefly then, so just to touch on, again, it might not be a brief conversation, maybe we should save it for the next one, but the Light Project, the organization that you're in, give us a brief rundown on that, because that sounds fantastic as well.
So the Light Project was established 5 years ago, and it targets a number of groups: professionals who work with young people, so that might be schools, police, social workers, counsellors, families and whānau, and then young people themselves. We have a really phenomenal youth site called intheknow.co.nz, and that targets lots of different types of sexual sexual/technology device use queries. So that's about porn, that's about nudes, that's about being asked to create and sell sexual content, being worried about your own sexual performance related to porn use, thinking you might be addicted, like all this stuff. And it's really good. And
as well, say
that again?
Dating apps? Do teens use dating apps, or no?
Not at a younger age, but we've got we've got some content on there as well on In the Know about, you know, how to pick up red flags if you've met someone online, because lots of young people are meeting people online, less so on an app. But yeah, so that's a really, really great, and it's been inputted in by, you know, dozens and dozens of health professionals and youth professionals. It's really good. And then the Light Project is focused on adults. The Light Project website, adults and professionals mostly, and that's specific to porn and how to have those conversations. You know, how do you do this well in your school? If you're a parent of a child versus a parent of a tween versus a parent of a teen, all different categories. How do we answer questions, and what are the right questions to bring up? So we do training nationally and internationally with all of the various professional groups, and with what I would call strongly research based as well, which means you can really rely on the content.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, that's so cool. Wow, it's been excellent talking, and we better wrap this up. But thank you so much for your time and expertise. It's been great, and people can obviously, they can find your TED Talk. That was Christchurch, was it?
Yeah.
Your website is
joerobertson.org.
joerobertson.org. You just disappeared.
Easy.
Sorry. joerobertson.org, and it's Sex Therapist Joe on Instagram.
Yep, that's right.
Anything else? Do we find
No,
you?
that's way too many. There's too many things already.
Okay. And so in terms of the sex therapy and any of the other services and the workshops and stuff like that, that's all accessible online like this, or in person?
Yeah.
So that's really cool. Recommend people go and check that out. Awesome. Thank you so much. And when you come back, we'll talk about betrayal trauma and
infidelity.
Talk about if you ever got to the if you ever talked to your kids about our clitoris book and what they thought of it.
Yes.
A review from a 9-year-old.
I know, on the clitoris book.
Yeah, that'd be great. Awesome. All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome. See you. Bye.